The barbell deadlift might be the most overrated lift in the gym. You're loading plates, you're chasing ego, you're trashing your spine for less results. I stopped doing them regularly, and I'm going to show you why. Most athletes believe the more weight you lift, the stronger you get. But that belief has broken more bodies than it's built. And when it comes to strength training, you don't have to guess. You can actually measure force. In today's video, I'm going to show you the difference between a 100 kilo deadlift to failure and what happens when I switch to the X3 bar, where the force output skyrockets without joint pain. If you're injured or training to stay in the game longer, this might just change the way you train forever. Watch this all the way through, and you'll see exactly how I build more force, more safely, and why my athletes return stronger, not slower. All right, guys, so we can use this measure of foot-pounds in order to give us as much as possible an accurate, a measurable score of stress done when you're exercising, when you're moving, especially when it comes to the simpler barbell lifts. So for example, deadlift, about as simple as you can do right here. So what is foot-pounds? Foot-pounds, it's a unit of work. Technically, it's a measure of per pound of force per foot traveled in the direction of that force. So when I pick up a deadlift, let's just say, for example, well, the calculation is foot-pounds equals force in pounds times distance traveled in feet. So let's use the example. If I have a 300-pound deadlift, if I do a 2-foot lift, so it's per pound of force per foot traveled in the direction of that force. So if I have a 300-pound deadlift, it's going to travel 2 feet per rep. So if I do 1 rep, that's 600 foot-pounds. All right. If I had a 1-foot deadlift, it would be 300 pounds for each rep, right? So we can give it a score. If I do the same weight, 5 reps for 3 sets, that's 9,000 total foot-pounds. So we can use foot-pounds to give us a measure of work done. The biggest drawback of this, like, it doesn't really apply to time under tension. So like if I do a really slow motion deadlift versus a really fast and explosive one, it's not the same. We're doing the best we have. When I use the X3 bar, that does take into account, so that may be more accurate. It is much more accurate, much more useful, but this gives us a gross simplification. So let's see what my set of deadlifts coming up is going to look like. Alrighty folks, so we've looked at the basics of this is what foot-pounds is, and we can use this to kind of analyze this is the stress that's being subjected onto your body. And while it's not an exact science, because how the fuck can you measure it exactly, things like this, it gives you a pretty good idea. So what we're gonna do here, guys, we're gonna plug in some numbers. So something that we can do, so I've got a pin here. When I go to pick up this barbell, I'm getting to right there on my thigh. So that's right at the top of where my pocket is. And so I can just make another little line there. So what we can do is measure, and I'll plug this in after the fact so that it's showing on screen. Okay, so there's gonna be in inches, and that comes out to right about 19 inches. So what I'm gonna do is plug it in so that's showing on screen the foot-pounds that we're getting with a 100 kilo barbell. We'll make sure that's converted into pounds. That's about 225 pounds. And what we're gonna do right now, I am gonna use weightlifting straps just to help get more reps. We're gonna do a single set to failure. So I'm gonna keep going until I cannot do any more reps. This doesn't usually apply to deadlifting, but I will try to go for partial reps if I can, and then we'll plug in the numbers as best we can so we can get a total stress score from a 100 kilo barbell for deadlifts. Okay. Always make sure that you guys get warmed up properly. Also, figure 8 weightlifting straps. I've just recently been using them. They're glorious. So max deadlifts at 100 kilos. Let's go. Wouldn't have been able to do that without weight straps. Arms were getting tingly at the end there. Right. Oh. Okay, so "20 reps. I was fighting for that 20. I wanted to give up. Had about the 17 or so. All right, so we'll have a force score, stress score, foot-pound score from doing that many reps. Let's look at what it's like when we use the X3 after I've caught my breath and recovered, which might be in like 20 minutes. Alrighty folks, so we've recorded what the deadlifts look like, and we'll show the amount of force in the after video that got. Now the X3 force bar and a heavy duty Generation 2 X3 Paraforce band. Ooh, that's a mouthful. One of the best quality resistance bands you can find. This thing is going to get heavy. Now I've got my other phone recording the Force app. So the bar is going to measure the weight, the resistance on the band at any given moment. So I'm going to have that recording, and after the set, going to show this all put together so you can see the amount of force done with this. So I'm going to do a single set, and you know what? It's going to be less range of motion with the barbell. So you'd think it'd be less work overall, because I'm going to do this so that my muscles in the band are constantly tense throughout, so I don't get a rest in between reps or anything. So we're going to shorten the distance from just below my kneecaps at the tendons right on the top of my shin up to almost all the way up. So I'll be about an inch short of where I'd normally lock out of, so that my ass and my hamstrings stay tense and engaged the entire time. Okay, so let's see how this looks. Again, we'll be using weightlifting straps. Okay, so we're going to show the force as we lift through this, and let's see what we get. Definitely still tired from the barbell though. Ah. 26 total reps. 20, no, that last one didn't count. That was just a little tug at the end. All right, so getting partial reps, because the whole point is to increase the amount of stress on the muscles. It's not about hitting a judging standard in a competition. It's about building that aspect of brute strength while not destroying your joints. So let's take a look at what the stress output is, how we're considering it between the X3 deadlift and the barbell work. Hey guys, I'm Ethan Hammond, and I just want to quickly go over what it is that we just saw in like a too long didn't watch kind of format. So basically, what we saw, this is extremely powerful if and only if you can actually understand how to utilize this and to make it work for you in your context for whatever sport or whatever objective you have with your athletics, with your exercise, or with your rehab recovery. So basically, I did 20 repetitions at the very start of this with a 100 kilo barbell. That gave me, so the barbell deads gave me a foot-pound score of, what was it, 6,892 foot-pounds. So I did 20 reps over X amount of distance, 1.5 something feet. The problem with this is that it doesn't give any accountability towards time under tension, which is where the X3 bar comes at a massive advantage. So for example, I was doing those barbell deadlifts. You can see I was going relatively explosively, and I was trying to shoot that bar up, go down quickly, hoist it back up. And that's great. My hamstrings were lit at the end. They were burning, they were worked, they were fatigued. And I went to the point of, I don't feel like I could go anymore. Like, that was a struggle to get past about 15 reps. And by 17, I think it was, I wanted to quit. And a lot of people, it's really common, I do the same thing. You kind of want to hone in on a number divisible by 5 or 10 when you're that close to it. So I was like fighting for that 20. And going past 20, I probably would have been able to lift it barely off the ground, and then I'm just done. Barbell deadlifts. Let me paint a picture for you guys. When you max out on your barbell deadlift, you do not actually max out with how much weight you can pick up to your hips. You max out on how much weight you can pull up off of the ground. Because when you're doing a barbell deadlift, when you're hinged over and you have your hands on that barbell, it's on the ground, that is your weakest position. That's where you're weakest. And that's where your back is most vulnerable, because leverage of how your muscles are all stretched out to get into that position, even if you get as tight as you possibly can, you're still mechanically weaker. This is just a simple biomechanics, simple physics lesson here. When you are that hinged over and that stretched out, that is your weakest part of the deadlift. So my best ever barbell deadlift is 180 kilos. Yet my best ever rack pull, so pulling a barbell from the knees, is 250 kilos. And if I was pulling from like halfway up my thigh and I was doing like a 1.5 inch deadlift, I'd probably be able to pick up even more. I didn't even have proper weightlifting straps when I did that 250 rack pull. I could probably do more than that now. So my barbell deadlift is very limited, and I'm moving through a range of motion where my joints are undergoing a lot more stress. Now, when we are doing movements with the X3, we do not lock out our joints. Whereas with barbell movement, it's a judging standard, but you're typically considered as like you have to move through that full range of motion. I don't recommend it. Why? Because remember, the context of this in my channel, guys, is we're looking at rehabbing athletic injuries. If someone has an injured lower back from deadlifting, we can get you deadlifting with X3 deadlifts. So using the X3 bar. And it's significantly less stress on your back, on the joints, and significantly more stress on the muscles. You're only moving through a range of motion where the bands stay tight and where the muscles stay taut. Because let's say I'm doing an overhead press and I lock out my arm. As soon as my elbow locks out, the muscles, they don't relax, but they relatively relax. They relax more than when the elbow is bent. And so as soon as my elbow locks out, the tension primarily shifts to the skeleton. Does that make sense? So like if I'm holding my arm like this, I can flex my bicep and I can get like maximal engagement there in that muscle. I go a little bit further, I can still squeeze the bicep, you can still see it tensing, but it's nowhere near as much tension. You can feel the difference. Power, not as much power. I lock out, I can still create some tension, but it's still relatively soft. You cannot create as much muscular tension. It's stretched out, that's where it's weakest, technically. And if I'm doing some like pressing overhead for reps, every single time I lock out the elbow, there's a jerk that happens, meaning things are suddenly changing tension. So tension transfers to the skeleton. As soon as I go to bend, tension jerks back onto the muscles. And it's that constant jerking over and over and over again. That is what largely attributes all this excess stress on the joints and causes a lot more harm over time, and why a lot of people get massively injured from weightlifting. With the X3 deadlifts, we stay tense the entire time. We don't lock out the joints because things will be harmful to the joints at that point. And dear God, it will get dangerous with certain movements. Like doing X3 front squats. If you lock out your knees at the top and you're getting to like 500-600 pounds of force at the top, they're fucking hell, because your knees are going to be going in that direction. If they have enough inertia behind them, they're going to keep going in that direction, possibly. And what was we're going to consider it foot pounds. What was my score for the X3 deadlift? Something like 24,000. So my stress score, 24,000, just under 7,000. Hell of a lot more stress. I can do a lot more reps. What was that? What was the app registering the deadlifts at just below my knees? Something along the lines of like 90 kilos, I believe it was. Something like just under 200 pounds. So going, if the bands were like getting tense at my mid shin, it would be slightly less than that or slightly more. It doesn't really matter. Point is that slightly less weight so I can pick up more to begin with, but the stress gets so much heavier. It was getting to like 460 pounds. So I don't know, 230 kilos there at the top that I could do for about 23, 22 full reps and then start to go from partials from there. It doesn't really matter, but something like that. So using the X3, we could get significantly more overall stress directly on the muscles without overloading the joint. So if we're working in the context of we need to be keeping our joints healthy, far more effective. Now, will this make me better at this? In a way, but I have to actually practice barbell deadlift. So I personally, I'm into powerlifting. I like back squatting, I like deadlifting, and I'm currently getting back into an old program that I was on with powerlifting because I want to get a 4 times body weight deadlift. That's heavy. So if I weigh about 70 kilos, I'm aiming for 280 off the ground. That'll be heavy. That'll be fun. I'm going to be using the X3 for my strength training and doing some barbell work for more like skill training and training that in range. Because using the X3 is not going to make me better at barbell deadlifting. I still have to practice that. Using the X3 will make me a lot stronger. It's not going to make me better at snatching or clean and jerking if that was something I wanted to get better at. Now, if I want to use barbell deadlifting just for the sake of getting stronger and not really as an end of itself, then nowhere near as effective as the X3. We still have to practice the skill with the other things, whatever it is. Does that make sense? So for example, a lot of people really like kettlebell training for strength training. Kettlebells are horrendous stimulus for getting stronger. It's largely single limb movements, single arm movements. It's a lot more like stability work with the movement. You're not going to get anywhere near as much force if you were using like a barbell, which is a two-handed movement, which is always going to be a lot stronger, versus if you were using exercise machines, which are even more stable and you can incorporate even more force, versus the X3, which achieves maximum force if you're using the X3 bands especially. Does that make sense? It's all very context dependent, and you need to understand that. But the X3, especially if you're dealing with injuries, far more effective at stimulating greater force, which means greater adaptation, greater stimulus for getting stronger. Then you use that strength and you apply it to your specific sport. If you don't have a specific sport and you're just wanting to get your muscles nice and strong, X3 all the way. If there's a specific sport you want to get better at with like the barbell or whatever else, don't use that specifically for the strength training. Incorporate some, of course, as it's relevant to you. Use the X3 for strength training. Use the other stuff for specific skill work, because the X3 is not going to make you better at, handstand walking, for example. Does that make sense? But it will make your arms and your shoulders and your upper back a hell of a lot stronger. You still have to practice the handstands. Hope that makes sense.